Hi everyone, my name's Ben Pullen and I'm the Group Director of Mobility at VUCA Group. And here on SMA News today, we have George Mienie, the CEO of AutoTrader. George, how are you today?
Yeah, really good, Ben. Thanks for having me here. I was just kind of talking to you before we started, and how long I've been in this industry, and you said, well, are you still having fun? And thinking about that for a second, I am still having fun, and there just seems to be a lot to do given the place that we find ourselves in the world.
Absolutely. And talking of that fun, I can imagine that the evolution of the electric vehicle industry has added a new catalyst of fun for you and your team.
Yeah, yeah, it has. I mean, the thing we've learnt very kind of high level and anecdotally is initially when the electric mobility or electric vehicle, new energy vehicle, as we call it in this country, because including hybrids, started to rear its head a number of years ago. We thought it would gain momentum a lot faster than it actually is gaining momentum, and it's gaining momentum. So I'm not saying it's not, but I think there's many years to come of this kind of education and teaching consumers what it is and what the benefits are of driving electric vehicles.
Absolutely. And I can imagine in your space, you like new stuff, new cars, new launches, new technology, and it seems that the new energy vehicle just keeps bringing that, new players, new brands, new models. So it must be a really exciting time for you.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I would imagine that this time is like the transition from the horse to the Model T Ford. It's an exciting time because it's still mobility, but it's an entire new form of mobility, new technologies. It's really the only thing that's the same is the shape of the car.
Absolutely. And let's see how some of your website visitors and some of the consumers in South Africa are thinking about that. Are they really as excited as you and me as it stands? And so what we're going to do now is just unpack this EV car buyer survey that we've been doing with you guys for the last 4 years. So the fourth edition, we launched at Smarter Mobility Africa Summit just over a month ago. Your team, once again, putting a huge amount of work into ensuring that the data that you acquire is the most relevant it can be, and then compiling that in such a user-friendly way to read. So the fourth report now, which can be downloaded from the AutoTrader website, and we'll definitely be sharing that link afterwards. So really excited to unpack it. I know we went through it in some detail at the event as well. I thought today we could have another conversation around it, just here as well. Any perspectives you might have on any of the results in terms of what it means for the market, and allow our audience to get a bit more of an insight for some of those insights that you draw at AutoTrader.
Yeah, so I mean, if we can give you a bit of an overview of some of the findings, out of this fourth survey, and we're really excited to have partnered with VUCA and Smarter Mobility because if it wasn't for you guys, maybe this would have taken a lot longer to do. But when you and I met, Ben, I think that was the catalyst for these EV car buyer surveys, and since then we've gone on a path of discovery, and I think the reality is that there's a dilemma in South Africa, and that dilemma centers around 3 out of 5 passenger vehicles in the country are exported, and we manufacture 0 battery electric vehicles. Coupled with that, the looming deadline of other countries in Europe of 2030, 2035. I see the UK is trying to walk back their 2030 back to 2035. But be that as it may, it's a mere 7 years away, and consumers out of this report or this fourth iteration, we find at a high level, consumers are more aligned now to the reality of home and public fast charging. Consumers want to pay no more than 500,000 Rand for their EVs. So there's still a major gap in terms of price. And consumers don't want an EV with less than 300 kilometers of range. So we need to fit the bill for those three things. And and I think we're a little way off, but it's getting better, and the report shows that it's getting better.
And so it's in its fourth year, and just in terms of why it's important, because when we first did the report, and it was new, and we were excited about it. So why is it important that we've done it for the fourth year, and why is it important that we continue to do this report?
Major reason I think it's important is education. It just seems that in any part of the world, human beings change very slowly. Most human beings are resistant to change. Even if that change smacks them in the face, it's very difficult for human beings to change. So the way that a human being will change their mind is if there's compelling evidence that is presented to them that their future will be better. So another partner of ours puts it in a way that says the pain of change needs to be less than the pain of staying the same. And so therefore, you need to paint the picture that the pain of change is lower than the pain of staying the same. And I think that's the important reason of why we should continue to do these EV bias surveys, is because as we go through the education process, we lower the pain of the future change, and we increase the picture of the pain of the current reality. And when consumers begin to realize that their future is actually a better place, for whatever reason, be it lower fuel costs, lower energy costs, lower car cost of ownership costs, those kinds of things, then that lowers that future pain, and consumers start to realize that staying the same is actually more painful.
And we've seen an uptick in electric vehicle adoption. I think it grew by around 100%, if I'm not mistaken, from last year. So how does the survey reflect the current state of the new energy vehicle market in South Africa?
So if you read the report from reports.autotrader.co.za, you'll see that the experience and ownership is still low. So while, as you mentioned, the growth is doubling, and that's an exponential effect. So if that continues, that's a good thing. The experience and ownership levels are still low. 58% of South African consumers want to own an EV. So there's no lack of appetite or lack of interest. But experience and ownership are still quite low. So we believe that this is predominantly as a result of shoppers and their understanding of living with an EV, and that's why, again, EV bias survey and the things that you guys at Smarter Mobility do are important. So in 2022, we saw a 136% increase in EV sales, and this year, just for half the year, we saw a doubling of the EV car sales in South Africa. So we have 501 by the end of June 23. So that's encouraging that there's this exponential effect. So we could likely see that doubling effect into the future. And so where does that put us 5 to 10 years from now? It's going to depend heavily on incentives and policy and government regulation. That's the next big thing.
And talking of government regulation, I know there's been the odd rumor or suggestion that we may be seeing some kind of policy changes coming up. That didn't happen this month, November, in the budget announcement. What kind of policy changes do you think are required, and what might we expect over the next few years? And I appreciate that's a bit of a crystal ball, but let's have a go at that.
I mean, I've thought about this a lot, Ben. It's not rocket science, and it's not like I've got the magic wand that I'm about to kind of unpack for you. I think it's really just logic, and that logic is quite simple. At the moment, government makes very little, if not zero, out of EVs in the country. There's a difference between import duty to the tune of 18% to 25% for EVs, and sometimes more depending on the price of the vehicle. So that gap of 18 to 25%, that's 7%, is an immediate thing that the government loses nothing by dropping. Absolutely nothing, because at the moment they're not gaining anything out of that extra 7%. That's quite I think that's quite a big carrot that could be dangled. And then using corporate businesses to drive the adoption of EVs. In South Africa at the moment, to drive a company car is more expensive for the consumer, for the driver of that car, than having a car allowance. So most companies in South Africa opt for car allowances. Most consumers don't opt for a company car, they opt for car allowances because it's more expensive from a tax point of view. So if you ask yourself, well, at the moment, the government's making not a lot out of company cars because people don't opt for them, they rather opt for car allowances. Why not incentivize company cars from an EV point of view? So if your company gives you an EV, there's extra tax incentives as a consumer. It'll use corporate business to drive EVs into the market, more sales of EVs, then the second-hand market will pick up. So using incentives directly with the consumer is a difficult uphill battle. But using incentives that use corporate businesses to drive fleets, I think is a better solution than using the consumer and trying to incentivize the consumer to buy and drive EVs.
That's a really interesting perspective, and I know it's something that's driven demand in the UK and other countries in Europe. The tax incentive has just been so attractive for businesses to go electric. So it's driven demand on that side, and I haven't really thought about it from a South African perspective. The car allowance, if you could just unpack that a bit more, just so we can understand that. So you're saying that currently the car allowance is more attractive than providing a company car, and there could be something we can do with that.
Yeah, so at the moment, in order to drive, or should I say, if you do get a company car from your employer, you have to pay tax on the value of that car to SARS on a monthly basis, and you do get deductions for a logbook that you keep. In South African tax law, you do get deductions against that company car tax, but that tax is immediate. You pay it on a monthly basis. You can only claim the tax, the incentive and the logbook related costs back at the end of the year. It makes the car allowance more attractive on an immediate basis. So there are ways to get companies to provide company cars to consumers where the government could say to the corporate business, well, you don't have to levy as high a tax immediately in that employee's salary. We could lower that tax on a monthly basis and then still provide the ability for the consumer to rack up their mileage in a logbook and claim incentives at the end of the year. So the one way is neutral, which is try and neutralize that claim back at the end of the 12 months. And the other way is to lower the overall tax even further. So I think there's two ways to skin that cat from a company car point of view, because everybody most people in South Africa, in the middle class, live from month to month. Let's not kid ourselves that the vast majority of consumers live from paycheck to paycheck. So driving a company car actually pushes up your costs month to month. You don't want to have to wait till the end of the year to do this big tax calculation and claim back expenses.
That's a really interesting area to explore further, and I think it's something we'll definitely do at Smarter Mobility Africa Summit. I do remember conversations with some of the government departments across South Africa, and they were telling me how much they actually provide in fuel cost expense claims, and it was a significant amount. And we did some rough calculations on the back of a beer mat, and saw how much the government could be saving just by instead of expensing people for fuel claims, they expense them for their electric vehicle charging. So perhaps an area to explore as well, just some of those direct costs that government and corporates can save from switching how they actually reimburse or expense certain fuel claims.
Exactly. And I mean, the entire system, unfortunately, from a car allowance and company car point of view, is built around fuel cost, servicing cost, maintenance, and wear and tear. And we all know that EVs don't suffer from those problems as much as ICE vehicles do. So therefore, what do you claim back at the end of the year on an EV? You're not putting fuel in the car. Can you claim back your energy costs? So the system isn't built for EVs. The system is built for fuel guzzlers.
Mm. So is there an opportunity for, say, a consumer who's claiming money back for their car usage, to actually make some money, not make some money, but save some money? So if they're getting paid, I don't know, 20 Rand a mile or whatever it might be, with their electric vehicle, they have less costs, and therefore, if they're still getting the same rate from their employer, there's a way that they can save a lot more money on that.
Yeah, so I mean, most companies today, and what you're talking about is a reimbursive type environments. Most companies today, if an employee uses their own vehicle to travel for work for whatever reason, most companies pay that employee a rate per kilometer, and most of the time it's based on the Automobile Association, or the AA of South Africa's rates, and even those rates from the AA are deeply rooted in calculations that take into account fuel cost. So right now, if you do have an EV as an employee and you do get a rate per kilometer back from your employer, you're actually in the green, because the cost to run your EV is going to be a lot lower. So that exists already.
Very interesting. So I've taken us down a bit of a path there, but I think it's quite important related to the survey, because there might be certain perceptions and expectations around an electric car costing more or less if they did it through their employer. So quite an interesting area for us to explore a bit further as we go along. And then in terms of demographics or geographic variations, what stood out this year in the survey? Were there any changes?
Yeah, so we saw that. I just want to get to the actual data. Yeah, so we saw that 30% of 65-year-olds said that they were unlikely to purchase an EV in the future. So 65 years and older. On the flip side, only 13% of 24 to 35-year-olds were unlikely to purchase an EV in the survey for South Africa. So what that tells you immediately is that the younger generation are more open to purchasing and driving an EV, and I suppose that is kind of goes without saying. The older we are as human beings, the more resistant to change we are, and so things like the EV buyer survey and what Smart Mobility is doing are important, because where does the real money sit in any society? It really sits in those people north of 35 years old, and up to 60 to 65 years old. So the real money sits in those categories, because you've built a career, you've built some wealth, those kinds of things. So the fact that over 65-year-olds are resistant means that we've got an opportunity to really communicate to those people, because they have the money to buy EVs, probably their last car, before they go and to the other side of the Rubicon. And then 10% of respondents aged 18 to 24 indicated that styling was an advantage, versus only 3% of respondents aged 45 to 54 years old. So the younger generation seems to value aesthetics over the middle age groups like 45 to 54-year-olds. So I think there's an opportunity here to continue to educate the demographics that really have the wealth. Because if younger people are more open to EVs, we're going to wait a very long time before they're able to afford that EV in today's economy.
Yeah, really interesting when you look at the demographics. And I wonder what's being done to target any of those certain demographics at the moment. Are there any examples that you might have seen over the last few years where brands have chosen specific demographics or certain activations to try and bring them into their product?
Well, not specifically to those younger people, unfortunately, not yet. Companies like Volvo are bringing out bringing to the country the EX30 at the end of this year, which will go for 700 or retail for 799,000 rand. Still, I think out of reach for a 25-year-old. So it's really difficult at these price points to market to a young generation between the ages of 18 and 35 because they just simply can't afford the cars. That's why it's so important to get a car, an EV in South Africa below 500,000 rand. Now, Bike, BAIC, as a company, the Chinese brands are looking at bringing more cost-effective EVs to the country, which I'm excited about. Most people are very resistant to Chinese brands, but since the advent of the Haval and other brands that come from the East, I've seen a real quality increase in those brands and what they produce. So I'm not too afraid of a Chinese electric vehicle. As a matter of fact, I think China's probably got the most volume of EVs driving on the road in their country. So they've got a lot of experience with EVs, and if they could bring an EV to South Africa for under 500,000 rand, I think that would speak directly to that particular younger demographic.
Absolutely. And China is now building parts of the Mini Cooper. So, they're building for even the European brands now. So it seems like they've gotten to a point where quality is matched at least. And I've driven a few of those electric brands, Chinese electric brands as well, and they're incredible to drive.
Exactly, and EVs are simple. I mean, they're really not a complex technology like ICE vehicles are. There's complexity in the software, but the actual physical mechanical parts of the car are not complex at all, like an ICE vehicle. But kind of looking at Tesla on the flip side, Tesla is now busy gearing up to produce, I believe, their $25,000 entry-level EV, which if South Africa comes to the party with government regulation and provides incentives, I have no doubt that potentially Elon Musk might just bring that mass market car to South Africa. And I think that might just wipe the floor.
Yeah, and that will certainly be cause for celebration. The South African Elon Musk coming back to finally launch the Tesla car that I know so many in the country would love.
Exactly. I mean, I'd love it myself. I mean, Tesla. In the early years, I went to visit the Fremont factory many years ago, and my Jaguar I-Pace, in my opinion, has a better build quality than those early Teslas. But I think Tesla has come a long way, and their build quality is a lot better now.
Mm. You mentioned quite a bit about the 500,000 rand mark that would perhaps turn some of the market. How has that changed over the last few years in terms of a price point that consumers would like? And what do we currently have in the market today? And what might we expect in 2024 to meet that point?
So nothing much has changed from a price point of view, or should expectation point of view. So there is a subtle shift up to 600,000. So more and more consumers are willing to pay slightly more than 500,000 rand, but the vast majority is still seated in that below 500,000 rand magic number. And so I don't see that changing very easily over the coming 2 to 3 years. There are more consumers in the in that have appetite for EVs. So I think that's what's pushing that number towards 600,000 rand, but definitely not overwhelmingly. What is in that category in terms of price? Nothing, except for second-hand vehicles. The BMW i3 has just recently, from a second-hand vehicle point of view, dipped below 500,000 rand. So you could pick up an old BMW i3 for under 500,000 rand. And the next car to get to go below 500,000 rand is likely to be the Mienie electric. Other than that, all the other cars are above 500,000 rand, even in the second-hand market.
Wow. So the second-hand market is still retaining the values of those new vehicles, then it's not seeing a significant drop in price.
No. Well, I mean, so there has been a drop in price in general. Excuse me. Across all vehicles, very slightly. Prices are still holding up quite well across ICE vehicles as well as electric. But the challenge is most of these vehicles, historical second-hand EVs, their price point was above R1 million when they were new. When South Africa started to see EVs, the only two was the Mienie electric and the BMW i3 that weren't. If all the other EVs were north of R1 million. So in order for that second-hand vehicle to depreciate down to 500,000 rand, it's going to take a long time.
I quite often use your sister platform in the UK, AutoTrader. I mean, daily at the moment, I'm just constantly scanning the second-hand EV market. I'm in the market for one.
Oh, wow.
And I'm looking at the Vauxhall Corsa E. So Vauxhall is the UK version of Opel, and you can get a second-hand one, so a 2021 model for say 240,000 rand, 280,000 rand. So it's become very attractive as a second-hand EV market, and it just continues to develop in that way as more and more new vehicles are introduced to the market. So it's quite an exciting time when you see the market evolve to that maturity where the second-hand EV market becomes really attractive to open up to many other customers that maybe were priced out at that point in time.
Yeah, I mean, in most parts of the world, if not all parts of the world, the second-hand market is at least 2 to 3 times bigger in terms of trading volume than the new market. And it goes without saying that a new vehicle can be traded up to 2 to 3 to 4 times before it reaches the end of its life. So it's not, out of the realm of consistency that EVs will follow the same trend, although it remains to be seen as to maybe the EV secondhand market might be 3, 4, 5, 6 times the size of the EV new market because of how long they last. So we could find a situation where the secondhand market for EVs is a lot more buoyant and has a lot more activity than the secondhand market for ICE vehicles ever had, because of how long they literally last.
Certainly exciting time to see how that secondhand EV market evolves. And how much of your platform does secondhand car sales make up?
I mean, we're predominantly a secondhand car platform. We've got a couple of thousand new vehicles on our platform, whereas we've got about 90,000 secondhand vehicles. So we're predominantly a secondhand vehicle platform.
So AutoTrader really sits in a key place for that secondhand new energy vehicle market as it develops.
As it develops, yes. So that's why AutoTrader is getting in early. We're trying to help the country transition by using our platform as a captive audience, because we've got 4 to 5 million in-market car shoppers a month shopping on our platform. We feel like it is our duty to harness that captive audience attention and feed them information that's useful in order to help the country transition. That's our part to play in this transitioning market, is really education and communication.
And the sustainability and environment elements of electric vehicles, I think in the beginning that was a big draw card for many of the early adopters, obviously the technology as well. But from the survey, what are the consumer attitudes towards those elements, the sustainability and the environmental benefits that might come from new energy vehicles?
So very high up on the order of importance is environmental factors. Right up to the third and fourth most important element is environmental factors. But the environmental factors don't trump charging infrastructure and range. And that makes sense because as a consumer, we think about and care about our immediate needs over and above the environment. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We care about our basic needs first, over and above the environment. Nobody's going to put themselves in peril in order to save the environment. It's just, I don't think it's an instinctive thing to do. So it makes sense for it to be that way. I've always said that primarily EVs are a better, simpler, longer lasting technology ahead of the environmental impacts. Environmental impacts are important, but what are the reasons to buy? What are we going to tell consumers are the reasons to buy? I don't think we will get it through the gates at scale on the basis of environmental factors. I think we will get it through the gates at scale on the basis of meeting those immediate needs for the consumer and explaining to them that you're going to save costs, you're going to save fuel, cars going to last longer, it's a better, simpler technology. Oh yes, and by the way, you're helping save the planet.
And how do some of your clients position themselves in that sense? Are there any, not just on the sustainability side, but what are the key messages that they're using when attempting to sell electric vehicles, new energy vehicles to their customers?
Right now, very little. So we've taken it on ourselves to also play the role of being an industry voice to particularly car dealers, because I think the car dealer is unfortunately the last thought of player in the industry, almost viewed as a necessary evil. A lot of OEMs now with new cars are trying to go direct to the consumer and bypassing the car dealer. So right now, car dealers are selling EVs in South Africa in a very similar way with similar messaging to the way in which they sold ICE vehicles, but tacking on the environmental element to that sales message. And I think that that's the wrong way to sell an EV. Like we just spoke about a minute ago, the right way to sell an EV is really all of the other immediate benefits to the consumer, rather than the environmental benefits as the primary driver to selling an EV. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, Ben, within the dealer market in order to educate them around how to sell EVs to the consumer, what is important. And the EV buyer survey really kind of unpacks what's important to the consumer, and dealers would do well to use that EV buyer survey in their messaging when selling EVs.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me actually when I went into a BMW dealership in Abu Dhabi back in 2016, I think, and I was very optimistic. They had a BMW i3 on the floor, and I said, "This is incredible! It's amazing! I'm so excited for the next few years." And the dealer basically just said, "Look, we don't think people will be driving these for the next until the next 10 years." And he wasn't that wrong, actually. I mean, I think I was very optimistic about how quickly things would move, and they didn't move as fast as I would have hoped. But I guess they see things on the ground as well. They're having those conversations with customers, and in many ways, yeah, are not that excited to push those vehicles because they're used to what they have, and I think that they make more money on the other models. I've heard.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was interesting to have that discussion with dealership and just see the disparity between the OEM level and dealers as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got to appreciate as players in the market that um, worldwide, a dealership is really a family-owned business, and what they care about is volume, and selling the volume of cars in order to cover the overheads, make a profit, and make their business successful. And if EVs aren't there from a volume point of view, they're not going to change their entire messaging strategy in order to fit maybe a couple of percent of the market. So these businesses are SMEs, small to medium enterprises in most instances.
Mm. And in terms of the dealer allocation and the vehicles that they're getting from a new energy vehicle perspective, are you seeing any of those immediately end up on the Auto Trader platform as unsold showroom floor vehicles, or are they shifting the units when they come in?
In a lot of instances, like the BMW iX3, there is high demand, and I think it's because of the price point. It's an SUV. It mimics the old X3. So there's a lot of similarity there between what's in the market and what that electric vehicle is. So there are pockets of EVs where you're likely not to find an EV, and you have to pre-order it. But in the main, I think there's more stock than what there is demand.
Mm-mm. So I've heard, yeah, many times about Volvo, for example, just always sold out, even when people are considering to go for the Volvo electric vehicle.
Yeah, and I also think OEMs are trickling in the vehicles based on pre-orders. Like you mentioned, Volvo. Volvo has a pre-order system on their website. So they're looking at those numbers and saying to themselves, they're not going to bring in vehicles that are just going to sit on the floor. So you do. OEMs are smart. They've been doing this for a long time.
Good point. Good point. And maybe that brings us to a nice way to wrap up today's discussion. So OEMs are smart, and just thinking about strategic considerations based on the survey findings. What are some of the most important strategic considerations, firstly for Auto Trader? And then what advice would you give as strategic considerations for other stakeholders, new types of players, but also the traditional ones going forward?
Um, so I mean, the report doesn't speak directly to advice for OEMs on strategic considerations. However, um, I'm starting to doubt as to whether the manufacture of EVs in South Africa is a good short-term strategy for any of the OEMs. Um, um, and the way my mind thinks about it is as follows. There are many factories in Europe that have to retool, transition to manufacturing EVs. Um, And that's happening as we speak. That's happening in Europe. Many factories are turning in their production lines into manufacturing EVs. I don't see OEMs opening brand new plants besides Tesla. It's probably cheaper to change and retool and create a production line for EVs. And so in South Africa, what is the one competitive advantage that we have in Africa, for that matter, and that is we have the raw material, we have the minerals that the whole of Europe needs. So it makes sense for us to potentially focus on battery production and add value on the continent in South Africa, and not allow the raw materials and minerals to leave our shores only to come back in an imported vehicle. Or even if we create a production line in South Africa and we start to manufacture EVs, that we put an imported battery into that EV, and all we're going to do is build margin, or should I say build cost into the selling price of that vehicle. So I think in the short term, it makes sense to potentially focus on battery production and value added in the country or on the continent because of where those raw materials are, and to create more exports, bringing US dollars and British pounds into South Africa as a result of that. That's the first consideration in the short term, not in the long term. In the long term, I think we could get to being a manufacturing or a car manufacturing country. And then from an ICE point of view, focusing on producing ICEs for the parts of the world that the transition is slow at, Africa, Brazil, all of the parts of the world where the transition is going to be slower are going to still need ICE vehicles. So now you think about Europe retooling, making EVs, the ramp down of the production of ICEs. We could effectively see the ramp up of the production of ICEs as a result of the needs of those countries that are transitioning slower. So I think there is a quid pro quo around still being a manufacturing country and still producing ICE vehicles for those that are transitioning slower, but focusing on component manufacture from a battery point of view because of the raw materials. And then over time, as we transition, move back into the manufacture and production line of electric vehicles itself.
That's an interesting perspective, and certainly a different one that I've not heard of before. I'd love to add another angle to that, and maybe we put a question out to the audience, or maybe this is something AutoTrader would be interested to do, is around just mapping some of that data over the next few years. Because I think when we look at the transition to new energy vehicles in Europe, some people look at that final date, so 2030, 2035, as the date when the switch will happen. But actually, the switch is happening now. So Norway, for example, is 90% of new vehicles are new energy vehicles. I haven't looked at the latest figures across other parts of Europe, but I think it's in the 20, the 30%, the 40%. So it would be really interesting to see, by 2028, how many internal combustion engine vehicles are forecast to be sold in the UK and in France and in other parts of Europe. So map out what that demand is, and map out what that supply of vehicle is, and then, like you're saying, see where that shortfall or that gap is that maybe would be filled by South Africa. Because I think there's certainly something in what you're saying, and it would be really interesting to see how does that look when we look at the forecasted numbers.
Exactly.
And actually, is there going to be an oversupply or is there going to be a shortfall? And be really interesting to see which countries might be making up that shortfall, or which countries might get stung if there's an oversupply, because suddenly the cars they're producing just aren't being bought, and that turns to either a factory shutdown or a factory wind down.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'd be very, very keen to understand those numbers, but I think there's something in picking up the for lack of a better word, scraps of the ICE world
Mm,
as the rest of the world transitions.
yeah.
And where they move to EV, there's still going to be sales of ICE vehicles because the transition is not going to happen in a binary fashion, as you say.
Mm. The other interesting angle to that, and I think Martina, the CEO of Volkswagen South Africa, put it across at the SA Auto Week, was around in order for them to, or maybe this was from a manufacturing basis. They were saying in order for them to manufacture in South Africa, they really need to see that local demand. So, if I'm not mistaken, there was a mention of something like they would like to see 100,000 units being sold each year of an electric version of a Volkswagen before they even considered the the manufacturing of the vehicle in the country. So there's that kind of local manufacturing boosting local supply and demand of the vehicle,
Yeah.
and vice versa as well.
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, I actually went and visited the VW plant with Martina, and that number that you're talking about is 60,000 vehicles
Okay.
before they will begin manufacturing. And their strategy, VW's strategy, is shifting to manufacturing ICE vehicles for Africa. So they've taken the manufacture of ICE vehicles and strategically positioned themselves in a world where they realize that it's not the end of the road. It's not binary. There are parts of the world that are going to need ICE vehicles, and they're going to supply that demand. And what better car to do it with than the VW Polo and the Polo Vivo, which we manufacture in South Africa. And apparently, there's a third vehicle coming to our production lines, which is going to service the South African market and the African market.
And Martina also mentioned something around the battery manufacturing at SA Auto Week, which I only just caught a few words of. I wondered if you had any discussion with her around that. It was a similar discussion around they could only consider manufacturing batteries in South Africa if I think a certain amount of units were sold domestically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what that number is, but it makes absolute sense that in order to reach scale, you've got to have a demand, but that demand doesn't have to only come from South Africa. That demand can come from anywhere in the world. So scale, I don't think is an issue from a battery point of view. It shouldn't be an issue because the rest of the world needs these batteries, and we've got relatively cheap labor. So if we set ourselves up properly, I think it's not out of the realm of reality to become the supplier of batteries. Somebody's just got to do it, and that takes capital investment, which kind of is sometimes the mathematicians up there sit and deliberate.
Mm, very interesting time. And it seems like many of the provinces are very keen to support this new investment and new development. The Gauteng province with their Swane Economic Zone, Automotive Economic Zone, the Eastern Cape. So AIGC Eastern Cape, one of our partners, I think currently has 52% of market share for the automotive industry, and they're secured Stellantis only this year. So seems like there's a good appetite to continue developing the automotive industry, and I think the words that you're sharing today might be quite encouraging for them in terms of the kind of mix of automotive output that they can have over the next 5 to 10 years.
I'm hoping so, Ben. I mean, South Africa as a whole doesn't have the volumes to sustain a manufacturing environment. We only consume about 300,000 new passenger vehicles a year. It's not enough to sustain multiple brands on manufacturing lines in the country. We need that export. So there's different ways to skin this cat.
Very interesting. George, Mienie, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. I could continue this discussion for many more hours, and I'm sure we'll do it again very soon. Thanks for your insights, your input, and thanks for pulling together this great survey, the EV Car Buyer Survey, with us once again. Next year will be the 5th year, and we'll be celebrating that and seeing what the market perceptions and expectations are around electric vehicles.
Lovely. Thanks for having me, Ben. Always a pleasure. And, upwards and onwards. Let's, get the country changed, get their mindsets and perceptions changed.
Absolutely. Let's do it. Thank you, George.